myself. So, as I said at the head of the meeting, I'm Ed Horwich. I'm Chief Executive of Jewish Small Communities Network. If you've not come across Jewish Small Communities Network or not explored it before, we work or serve the around 55,000 Jews who live outside of the major conurbations in the UK. 20% of Jewish people in this country do not live in a big city. They don't live in Leeds or Manchester or London, perhaps not Glasgow. They live everywhere else in the country. And we do have a footprint which goes from really almost the tip of Scotland, well, at least as far as Dundee, but I think there are other people who live further north, and all the way down into the foot of Cornwall and the southeast of England, and of course Wales, and of course Belfast over in Ireland, and Dublin as well. So if you want to find out more about JSCN, as we call it, Jewish Small Communities Network, please do go to the website and have a wander around. We've got a fantastic events calendar, which is populated with lots and lots of Jewish events, which you can access, many of them free. That calendar has been going for the last year now, and lots of interesting events like the one you're at tonight. So I'm very, very pleased to welcome Caren Garfen to an in conversation with me. And the reason I asked Caren to actually come and talk to us is because, well, one afternoon, I noticed on Facebook, one of my friends said that they'd been to the Textile Biennale, which was held over a number of different small museums across Lancashire. And one of them happened to be just a few minutes drive away from me. And it was a nice sunny afternoon. I said to my wife, Fran, let's go for a drive. There seems to be a nice cafe there, of course. And off we went, about sort of 10 minutes drive up the road, up the motorway to the end of the M66 into the Rossendale countryside where the Whitaker Gallery is indeed. And we wandered around the Textile Biennale and the other exhibits as well as having some lunch. And I can highly recommend it if you're in the Lancashire area. Then I noticed there was a display case in the middle of the gallery, and in it was just one, what appeared to be a book. And I wandered up to it, and there seemed to be an open map, but it had some labels dotted all over it. And I'm sure Karen's going to talk to us about that in a minute. Anyway, I was intrigued, but I was also intrigued that many, many people in the gallery, as soon as they saw me and my wife looking very closely at this exhibit, started coming up to us and talking to us about it and telling us what they thought it was all about. I mean, it was quite clear what it was all about, but they were really enjoying telling us about it. And it was really something which stands out, a piece of, how would you say, Caren?
Well,
a critical work of discrimination against Jews?
I would say so. I mean, it's about the Holocaust. I wasn't actually making any works about the fashion industry. I have obviously looked at the 1930s and the rise of Nazism, but it wasn't my plan to do anything about fashion. But I belong to a group, it's the 62 group of textile artists. It's a highly esteemed international group, and they gave us a brief. So you could do anything, but it had to fit somewhere along the line of this brief. And I was looking at the 1930s Berlin fashion and textile industry. And gosh, at first I was looking at people what they did and what they achieved, and that they were successful. But we know all about those people, you know, they're documented and they're in historical books. But then I changed it, I twisted it around, and I wanted to look at people who had been forgotten because they were murdered or they had to leave the country, they were put in concentration camps. So I wanted to give them recognition for the incredible things they did, and their talents, but it was lost, just lost to the world, really.
Well,
So it was
let's
a
look at that
fascinating
piece.
journey.
Let's look at that piece in closely in a minute. But maybe this would be a good time to just show people a little. I know we're not talked about technique at this point, but this gives an insight into the intricacies of how you work. And maybe you can tell us historically how you came to do this as well. But shall we show the piece by the V&A, the little film? Okay, so I'm going to share the screen, and this is a short film which was produced by Victoria and Albert, the V&A, about Caren and how she's working. And after that, we'll look at the piece that Caren was just talking about.
I'm an artist and I like to sit quietly, listening and observing, and use my favourite medium of textiles to express what I find out. I'm drawn to cloth for its tactility and its relatability. It can be manipulated to create powerful and emotive artworks. I really enjoy the rhythm of the needle through the cloth. I find it meditative and calming, especially when dealing with difficult and discomforting concepts. The piece that I'm currently making is about the Berlin textile and fashion industry of the 1930s and the impact of the Nazis. I found out about an organisation called ADEFA, whose aim was to eradicate Jewish people from all areas of the German fashion world. The title of this artwork is Fragments, because there was only an imperceptible remnant of the thriving and innovative fashion industry left in Germany by 1938. I've constructed a textile swatch catalogue using an atlas that I've had for many years, opened at a map of Central Europe with Germany at its heart. A few weeks ago, I put a call out inviting people to donate their old celebratory skull caps, which had originally been handed out at weddings and bar mitzvahs. I unpicked these beautiful, colourful items and cut the fabric into colour swatches. The labels which accompany these textile fragments have been hand-stitched with the names of a tiny proportion of Jewish fashion companies which were decimated by ADEFA, and the bright colours that I've used draw in the viewer, who can then read the fate of people whose worlds fell apart because of hate and bigotry.
And just to bring that up on screen, that's the display of that particular piece at the Whitaker Gallery itself. And that's how I first came across it. So Caren, that's not the first piece you did. What would you like to talk about first? Would you like to talk about the technique and how you came to do this sort of work, or would you like to talk about that piece or the first piece in this series that you've done?
Well, we could just talk about this as we're on the on this particular wavelength. We'll talk about this just a little bit, and then we can go back to how I came to be doing what I do. Yeah, so with this piece, I just wanted to say something really interesting, which I actually haven't told you, Ed, is that I got an email just a few days ago from somebody who had seen the work, and she said that her mother was actually related to one of these people on the label. And it was a really interesting email, and she'd been in contact with her cousin in America, and they actually have this meeting, you know, they meet up, this tutor, the man was Jacob Tutor, and he was in business, a very, very successful business, one of these labels, and it was Kirsten and Tutor. And as it happens, Kirsten, I don't know the full, I didn't know the full histories of any of these people. There's very little information. But in this one, Kirsten actually dies of natural causes in about, I think it was 1933. And so Jacob Tuteur takes over the business. He's a hugely successful man, and he had 2 villas, and he was really innovative. Had this amazing shop, huge shop, something you would be used to today, like Selfridges or Harrods, with the big, really large windows. And he had this exceptional building which he had designed with these 3 really large windows, and they used to do innovative things like having fashion shows in theatres and things like that. So they were very, very well known, very successful, very talented, very innovative. And the one thing I didn't know, I knew all I had was this tiny bit about his name, about the business, and that he had committed suicide in 1939. But what I didn't know was that he was married to someone who was not Jewish, and he lost his villas. Obviously, they took away his business. And they put him in some sort of boarding house with his wife. And the wife actually, I don't want to upset people, but she just said, this is what I've heard from him. I'll just read it out. That that he was, they expropriated Jacob's villas and sent him with his wife to a boarding house. And his wife turned on her husband, demanding that the Jew boy leave. Forced to move out and stripped of his wealth, Jacob first killed his beloved dog and then committed suicide by an overdose of Veronal or Veronal. Yeah, I mean, I just said he committed suicide, and there is his family out there who know all about him, who know about his success, and then this devastating news. I found it really devastating to know the full story about him and all his success and everything that was taken away. And this is just from having that artwork in the Whitaker. And it's just interesting when you have that really personal connection to somebody whose work is, whose name, whose family is on that artwork. It's happened with other artworks as well, which creates a really emotional response. And this one created a really emotional response to me because it's a real person. That's why I chose them. These are real people who really did suffer terribly and were treated appallingly and either committed suicide. A huge number of Jewish people committed suicide in Berlin, much more than the average would in 1 year. Yeah, so devastating.
So how did you actually come about selecting the names or the businesses that you did select?
Well, it's it's a matter of research, and whatever artwork I make, it's like huge amounts of research and books, book after book after book, and if I can find anything on the internet as well, and talking to people as well, whatever I can find is how it works. And these people, I wanted to have a real selection of people. So there were people who were made buttons or had children's shops or were actually they were designers themselves, individual designers, or just very creative, talented people. And I chose their stories where they tried to escape. I've had lots of people, well, few people who have said, well, why didn't they escape? Why didn't they get away? And all this thing. And then you realize, well, they did try to escape. People who could, if you had the means. Not everyone had the means to leave the country. So people went to Belgium or they went to the Netherlands, but then they weren't safe there either, or France, they weren't, because when the Nazis invaded those countries, these people were picked up and, sent to concentration camps or murdered or whatever. They suffered terribly. So I wanted to have this cross-section of different types of people. But these are a tiny remnant tiny fragments, you could say, of which is the name of the artwork, of people that really did suffer because they were set upon in 1933. A DEFA was set up. It was a really anti-Semitic group of people that wanted Jewish people completely out of the fashion industry. It took them a while because the Jewish people, they're about nearly 50% of the Jewish people in the fashion industry were working with non-Jewish people, and they were an amazing community. You know, they were working hand in hand, and they were all a success in their own right. It wasn't just Jewish people, but it was a Jewish people that were set upon. And this DEFA, actually, you can just see at the top, there's a flag, which is a hand-stitched flag, and that was the motif and their emblem of a DEFA. And these were all put on clothing. They were put on clothing, and to say, these are Aryan products, these are German products. In other words, they weren't Jewish people, and you mustn't buy from Jewish people. So you can see here that I use these swatches. These color swatches were actually from couples or yarmulkes or a skull cap. I use those specifically because I wanted to say Jewish people have survived. Jewish people are actually celebrating things and doing what they would traditionally have done thousands of years, you know, with the weddings and the mitzvahs or whatever circumstances, even circumcisions. These traditions have carried on from time immemorial to the present day. So I actually sent out a call asking for people if they could send me spare yarmulkes. I mean, it's quite amazing because I think one person sent me 28. So it's quite
people are collectors or hoarders.
Yeah, perhaps. So I unpicked them and I cut them, and they became the swatches, which went on to this vintage atlas. And of course, the names that you can see there, labels, which I made and hand stitched, as you saw in the film. So you're looking at these individual people whose businesses, you can see here, were acquired in forced sales, or they just were pressured to sell their businesses for very little money, or they were sent to, as you see here, Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz. And yeah, so in this one, I think you can see Budapest and Vienna and Bratislava. These are places where there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and Jewish people there were taken away and killed. In fact, I think yesterday on the 9th of November, which actually it's actually my birthday, there was Kristallnacht was then, and so yesterday they actually, for the first time, Austria has actually created this memorial for the people, all of the thousands of Viennese Austrians who were murdered in the Holocaust. So they are being celebrated. I know that there is one other Rachel White-Reed memorial which I've seen, which is near the Jewish Museum, but it didn't actually say the names of the people. So it's quite interesting. And on here, there's a gap. There's a gap where of the people we don't know the names of the people who I don't think there might not be yes, you can see the black. There's a black one on the right hand side, and there's the gap, and that's the name of those people who were murdered, and we don't know who they are. They're missing. And the other gap, was sort of lower down, where there's another DEFA. I think maybe anyway, somewhere on there is Auschwitz as well. So you've got this. There's a lot of depth and meaning, layers of meaning in this piece, and the fact that it's a map of Central Europe as well, and the DEFA flag is on the city of Berlin. So there's a lot of things going on in there, and you can take what you want from it.
now that you're talking, you mentioned sort of the hand stitching in there. And when I looked at, I mean, it might be my glasses, I don't know. But when I looked at the work originally, it was the hand stitching is so fine. You can't distinguish it. I was thinking, is it printed?
Yeah.
Or is it stitched? Because obviously the textile element and the stitching element was something which is very important. That's why it's in the show. We'll probably look at some close-ups of some other works, and where it becomes clearer how much that is integral into the work. How did you actually come to adopt this very, very fine or microscopic way of working?
Yeah, well, many years ago, when my children were very young, well, my oldest daughter, she was a baby, and when she was 1, I left her with my parents and I travelled across London with these miniature samplers. I started making miniature doll's house samplers, and it was a really lovely, thriving business. And so I was making these, and I took them to a doll's house, a woman who organised doll's house shows. She was really very well known and respected and top of the range. People made these amazing things, tiny things out of silver, little silver knives and forks, all beautiful things. And so I went to her with these little samples, and she said, right, you're in the next show. So it was sort of something. I've always been crazy about miniature things, small things, but to tell the truth, not crazy about stitching. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but my family, very creative. My mother, she would make the samples for models, for fashion designers. So it's quite interesting, actually, that I've made this piece about the fashion industry. So she was very talented, and my aunt was, and my sisters are very good with the needle and knitting, and all of my family, there's some sort of creative bent. But I hated sewing. As a child and at school, I used to make any excuse not to stitch anything. But it was just as an adult when I just went to a doll's house show and found there was a gap in the market. And I found a couple. They're all been sold now. I used to have an agent in America who sold my work all over the States and all over Europe. And because I had young children, I used to sell them in the UK. So I actually found a couple. So you can see the size. This is quite a large one. It's there we go. And it's very traditional. This is a bigger one. Smaller ones with alphabets on, and they're all authentic, and the designs are of the period. So that's what I did for 15 years. And I was sort of getting a bit fed up of people saying, oh, how are your miniatures going? How is it going good? And I just suddenly felt like I needed a change. So I won't go into the whole history, but I decided to do a degree within the applied arts. And I did it over 5 years because I still had my family at home. But it worked out to be the most wonderful experience I've ever had, actually, because it just changed how I thought and what I did. And I had lots of time to play and do things and study. And I didn't do so much hand stitching, actually. And I was more interested in the thing that I dreaded the most, which was the essays, and the dissertation were my biggest fear. But then I did all the research, and I actually enjoyed that more than I did the making. The making was sort of experimental, and it carried on. It wasn't until the 5th year that I really got to grips with the making, even though I've been a maker since a little girl, really. So, yes.
Why do you think it took so long?
I think I've always been a late starter with everything. And I think these things, I think I didn't have the confidence when I was younger. And I think when I was young, I was, probably quite immature. And I think it's come with age. I think with age, I have the confidence and the knowledge and the understanding and the want do it. I mean, I've made things all my life, you know, whether it was jewelry or cake decoration and design, or you know, making brooches, whatever. I've always done it, even from a little girl. So, but it's now I feel like I've come into my own at the grand old age of, well, my birthday was yesterday, but we won't go into that.
Well, many happy returns for yesterday, and we won't go
Thank
into that. And so that's going and into doing a degree in the arts really sort of started to concentrate you, and then you started not on the Holocaust style of work or Jewish discrimination, because it's not just the Holocaust.
No,
that started you on doing what sort of work?
Well, originally I was making work about housework, really, and there was a lot of humour in the work in those days, and so I actually, the first piece I made, which was really serious piece, was for my degree show, and I made a never-ending tea towel, which you could turn pages of it almost. I called it Womanual, so it was woman and manual became a new word, and I did lots of other things relating to that, and there was humour, and it was like a day in the life of a woman. So it started there, and then I moved on to making things about gender, women and gender, and advertising, you know, women in adverts and how they were treated. And oh yes, there we go. This is a working manual, and it was fantastic because that piece went to new designers, and it was from there that I was selected for graduate showcase, and you turned the pages there. It was interesting piece, and so I did new designers, and from there I was selected for the graduate showcase, as I might have said, and then I did that and was shortlisted actually at that time for a prize, and then the next year I applied for new designers 1 year on, and I was awarded the main prize for that. And then I did the Knitting and Stitching Show graduate showcase with the Embroiderers Guild, and from that I was selected as a scholar for so I could show my work again, new work. So there was a constant thing happening, and I got some awards, and it was just a wonderful way to start my career as I was a textile artist. Now I just say artist because it can narrow things down when you want to make things which aren't just textile, although basically I love to stitch, or I like to cut things or whatever. So yeah, so it was a fantastic start. And then I was commissioned to make a quilt for the Victoria and Albert, had a huge successful exhibition called Quilt 1700 to 2010. So I made a piece for that, and it's just a wonderful experience.
What was that piece called?
Yeah, it's a good question. It was called How Many Times Do I Have to Repeat Myself? So it's quite an early piece, 2010.
We can just show
How
people.
many times? Yeah, that's the piece. So that was about women and whether they wanted to work or not, and I did a whole questionnaire, and so I was asking people what was their favorite furniture or item in their homes. I gave them a list of 10, and then it turned out that their favorite was comfortable seating, or things, or beds or settees, and I thought everyone would say a washing machine because that's what I would have chosen. Yeah, so there's a huge amount of research in there, and my questionnaire actually was very surprising. It said that 50% of women would rather not work, even if they were doctors or teachers or whatever they were doing, which was they trained for. They didn't want to do it. They wanted a more of a work-life balance. I was really fascinated by it. But the thing is, my work wasn't you know, it wasn't what's the word? Well, it wasn't serious. It wasn't a serious piece. So I actually contacted an academic from the London School of Economics, and she very kindly invited me there for lunch, and we had a chat, and I told her about my work, and she had written this book, this paper, 5 Feminist Myths. So I was very interested in that, and she said that she had found in her real academic writings and work and research very, very similar results to my very basic questionnaire. So that was fascinating, I thought, at the time. And yeah, it was great. The V&A came to my house, and the curator, and they did a film which you can find online, I think. And oh gosh, it was so exciting, going to private view at the V&A and surrounded by all these people, and it was absolutely packed. The show was packed for the whole time it was on. It's hugely successful for an exhibition which was about textiles.
So I want to ask you about 2 pieces of work that interest me. The one that for me starts off your current series, you know, with it explaining Jewish discrimination, well, not explaining, but bringing to the fore anyway, Jewish discrimination. So what was that first piece?
That piece, now, what was it called? I have made so many pieces.
It might be Stand Up and Be Counted.
Stand Up and Be Counted, correct. Yes, that piece, I had no intention of making any, yes, there we go. Yes, I had no intention of making work about Jewish issues or the Holocaust or anything like that. But I was out for dinner with some old friends of my husband, and one of them said something which really upset me, and I would normally keep very quiet and not say anything. And I just said, I don't think you know what you're saying here, but I won't go into details of what he said, but it made me feel very uncomfortable and quite angry. And I thought, I need to stand up and be counted, basically. And I just felt like I need to know more about my heritage, about traditions, about being Jewish, about Israel. I mean, I've been to Israel lots of times, but I just, that historical aspect of where we are today, and what happened to Jewish people who lived in this area, because there's just too much negative stuff going on about Israel, and I found it really, really distressful. Yes, this is an interesting bit, because I found this quote online, and it says Jews were part of pure Arab society, and the region was their home. I mean, they had been there for thousands of years, and actually indigenous to the area. And this is an Arab journalist who says they were forcibly driven out as a result of persistent harassment. Their property was nationalized, and they were subjected to systematic target, often being accused of betrayal and disloyalty. I mean, this was just really upsetting to know that actually so many Jewish people who lived in the Middle East and in North Africa were actually, they were subjected to the most terrible things. Their homes were taken away, or their jobs, or they were arrested, people were murdered, or they were expelled from their homes, which they'd been part of for thousands of years. So that really was very, very interesting. And you can see they've all been expelled, all the Jewish people have been expelled. And I think, if I can find it somewhere, Lynn Julius, she's written this fantastic book called Uprooted, which I didn't actually find until after I'd done all my research, which was a shame. But she talks about civilization which vanished overnight, and there actually more Jewish people were expelled from this area than the amount of Arabs who had to leave Israel. A lot actually left. I read the other day, a lot left from their own accord because they were stuck in a war zone, so they left. But it's just very interesting that those refugees, the Jewish refugees who had to leave their homes and move to other countries or a lot to Israel, had to adapt to a whole new situation and make new lives in a new country. And that's what they did, and they were supported, which was fantastic to be supported by other people. But the Palestinians, I know it's a really difficult thing for people, but the Palestinians have remained refugees. So they've been allowed to, for some strange reason, they've continually allowed generation after generation to call themselves refugees when they should be moving forward with their lives. It may be political, quite a political thing to say, but it's true that the Jewish people moved and they moved on, and they're not refugees. They're living their lives. They didn't have easy lives either. But it's a fascinating thing that no one talks about it. They only talk about it from one point of view. And I want to talk about it from the other point of view. And the best way really is if you can do it through textiles and this very soft medium that we're all used to. And so that's where it started. And incredibly, as a real novice and not knowing very much about the history, this piece was actually acquired by the Jewish Museum London. And it was the first piece I made, which related to antisemitism or the history of Jewish people. So that was a huge, huge boost. And I'd already started the research. And now, yes, it's carried on since then, basically.
Do you think that working in textiles makes it easier for people to, makes the ideas come along with the medium? Does it make it easier to access because there's a piece of textile work?
I think definitely textiles, because it's part of all of our lives, from the moment we're born to the moment we die, we are surrounded by textiles. They're very tactile, and I'm very, very interested in text, but something that's written down is not quite the same as something that you spend hours and hours of stitching and meditating on and thinking about. So I think it's a different thing. And on top of that, people are really fascinated by the fact that somebody is stitching these tiny, tiny things, which of course I didn't say about the samplers. I call doing my 15 years of making these miniature dollhouse samplers, which was wonderful at the time, as my apprenticeship to what I do now. But now now I've come to this stage from all the humour and all the research about women, and then about eating disorders and the pain of the eating disorders and the discomfort of having to do that, and talking to people and listening to people who have eating disorders, has led me to this point. Basically, I couldn't have done this before I had done all the other things in the last, since 2007, basically 2006. So yeah, so I think the textiles are very important, and the stitching is even more important. Basically, what I do is
these are quite hard-hitting messages. I mean, this is what we're looking at on the screen now. The clarity of what it says is history, and then you have the juxtaposition of it being on a piece of textile. So why is it on a piece of textile? And then you're looking at it and you say, well, actually all the words are made up from stitching, which is integral with textiles. And where there is an obvious connection, when we looked at the quilt that you made, and you could say, well, that is sitting within an accepted realm. This is taking that realm out of an accepted place in our lives, and it's confronting you because it's a material which is presenting something which normally would either be on screen, or it would be printed in a book or in a newspaper, isn't it? Or it would be a news report somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But this sort of, because it's small and it draws you in. At first, you're saying with most of my artworks, it's a similar story, is that it draws you in because you're looking at something which is much smaller and interesting. You say, wow, that's a great map, let's have a look. Or I made a doll's house about eating disorders, and people go, ah, let's have a look, it's a doll's house, let's have a look. And then they're focusing on each room, and then there's sort of, I've noticed people get very quiet as they're looking in the doll's house, which isn't, you know, just this cute little doll's house. It's actually telling a devastating story. So yeah, I think that's the thing, that you're looking at something really small which looks really innocent, but when you get closer or you read about the story behind it, you find there's much more than meets the eye of everything that I make. But you can take what you like from it. You know, you might not, you might not read into it as much as I put in, because
Shall we take a look at a taste of things to come, which perhaps is what you were just saying? Maybe at first it's not what you think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a very recent piece. It's been on display at the Knitting and Stitching show, and it was actually selected for an exhibition, fine art textiles exhibition, and not very many people got in, and it was great to get into this show. And it's already been shown in 2 places, but it's actually going to be in Harrogate in November for 4 days at the Harrogate Convention Centre with the Knitting and Stitching show.
Let's tell us where your work tends to be shown, because people might think, oh, well, it's very, what we're looking at now is very Jewish. It talks to a lot of what we know as Jewish people. I don't know if everybody in the room is Jewish, but certainly, you know, the way we've been talking about it is very much on Jewish themes. But where it's shown is perhaps not in that context. So tell us a bit more.
No, the interesting thing is that that first piece, the first piece of work, went to the Jewish Museum. And since then, other than 2 images on separate occasions in the Jewish Chronicle, none of this work has been shown in a Jewish venue of any kind. All of this has gone out into the wider arena. And so this piece, obviously the Knitting and Stitching show, which is for everyone. It's a huge show. It's absolutely fantastic. And they have stands where you have fine art textiles, or, you know, textile artists have their own stands. They're invited. You have to be invited, or in this case, be part of an exhibition. Other work I've made as was in Australia. By some amazing miracle, Australia was open for business at the time while we were all in lockdown. And so the work was shown in 3 different places. It was touring with the show, and it had been selected. So that was a wonderful thing, that it had been selected at a time where we were all very much closed in. And then the piece was called, where do you have it there? Piece. I've got some samples from it. It's called Selection, the piece that went to Australia, and to find it there. It's going to be right.
I'm going to scroll very quickly. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, it's this one actually, the one with the it won an award. It was absolutely fantastic. There were no other Jewish works, nothing about the Holocaust. It was just a general textile show, and so it was a biennale. And so it was number one. It was fantastic to get in, and especially going to Australia, and on top of that, the fact that it was a Jewish theme. And here is one This is one. Let's see if I can find the thing. Yeah, so this is just one little portrait. I had lots and lots of miniature frames, and you can see this, couple. And then I had already had these in my collection. They're like the lenses that you would get if you went to an ophthalmic optician, and they were vintage. So that would have the name. You can see them here. And in this one, you don't know anything about this young man, not his age or anything other than he was from Greece, and he was married and he was murdered. And here you can see Muriel. So I was actually looking at the historical side of people, and I just chose people who wore glasses, because number one, I was using these particular lenses, and on top of that, I wanted a cross section of Jewish people in Europe, in Nazi occupied Europe. So that's what I did, and I was really happy with how it was going, and I was really pleased to actually give these people a name, but I was also concerned that I needed to do something extra, that it needed something more than the historical part. So because I'm very interested in contemporary anti-Semitism, which is on the rise, unfortunately, and so that's another main interest of making this work. So I was looking at contemporary cases of people who were murdered, not in the Holocaust, but in the 21st century, people were being murdered. And I found one of Muriel, who was there before, and here she is. She was in the news not that long ago. Here she is, and she was murdered. She was stabbed 11 times. She was set on fire. You can see how big it is there. Her little memorial. I would call it a memorial. And that was in 2018. And there's still issues now about whether it was an anti-Semitic incident, when it obviously was. And there were two people involved who were actually shouting in Arabic these things about her being a Jew and things like that. So yeah, it was a really, really horrible case. There was another one of a woman, also I think in Paris, who was chucked from the balcony. So and people who have been murdered in the I think quite a few people in America were murdered in an incident. An incident sounds like this tiny small things, but these were major incidents where they were murdered. People were murdered, but I chose everyone in that instance also wearing glasses because I wanted it all to fit in together. And you can't use everybody. You have to have a cross section. And the only person that didn't have glasses was Muriel, because she was very important to me, because she connects the past to the present, because she was a Holocaust survivor. So there was a lot of depth and sadness in making this artwork. Yeah.
I'm aware that we're really going into this quite a lot, and we could probably talk for hours.
Yeah.
But we're coming up. We've done about 50 minutes already.
Okay.
And there's one story that you told me when we talked originally, and it relates back to the exhibition and your work being on exhibition in various places,
yeah.
and the people who then encounter it almost by accident. And if we go back to this one,
oh yes, sorry, we left that piece.
And I'll just whiz through these images because you've done some fantastic close-ups of them, which actually show the stitching. And from a distance, you might suspect that was a printed box of matches, but it isn't.
Yeah, that's textile. And the Schlagen, whatever it is, there is actually says strike and burn, which you might have on matches, but it was also what happened to the Jewish people And yeah, we do not serve Jews. This was actually really happened. It was in a book called Blood and Banquets by someone called Bella Fromm. Incredible book, written at the time. I'm very interested in looking at things which were at the time, because the memory is still very clear and doesn't get distorted. So this young couple very quickly were in a restaurant in Berlin, and Bella was sitting at another table with all these high-ranking people popping champagne, and she saw this young couple sitting down, and they ordered tea, and the waiters came along, and they'd been fawning all over the other table, and they came to them, and they gave them a cup and a saucer and a note. The note said what it says there: "We do not serve Jews." So I was haunted by that. I originally read it in a Martin Gilbert in his book, The Holocaust, when I first started doing the research. So it was always in my mind, and eventually it evolved, and this was the right moment to make this piece. So it's like the dregs, basically. We're treated like the dregs of society. And this was in 1933? 1933, I think, or 35. Anyway, it was quite early on, when people were already been treated appallingly. And that next to it, and I've done it in Hebraic, as though they're Hebraic letters in form, but and the sugar cube is also handmade and hand stitched. But that is a beautiful miniature cup and saucer. And they're all from Germany. That is actually a beautiful porcelain piece. And of course, you can see the teaspoon is from Berlin, and the what you saw before is the ashtray was also from Germany, and it's got an image of a castle, and that castle is where the Nazis hid the art, the looted art. So everything that you see is connected. There's a reason why it's there. Everything's there for a reason. Even the pen is from Germany. So everything is connected, including the vintage postcard, which is actually Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, where this restaurant was. And also you've got the Nazi stamp and all that. Yeah, it's all connected. Even the little coins are from that period. And fine, the most important thing to me, which isn't to everyone else, is the napkin, the serviette, which it's all hand stitched, and it took such a long time to hand stitch this. And on it, it's got every single thing that that Jewish people were banned from keeping pets, or from their jobs, or from being doctors or studying, or from the basic things up to the big things, are hand stitched on both sides of that. You can't see the other side. And then there's this tiny little, as if it's a laundry label, which is in yellow and says Judah on it. So there's a huge story going on there. Yeah, and
there's another story that you told about when it was on display, and it couldn't be, there was no cover on it to protect it, so they had a guard.
Yes, they had a security guard. And he said, "Oh, is this your artwork? I've been looking at it, and I've shown other people." And he said, "I came up close and I saw the date on it." He said, and he went cold. He said he knew exactly what it's about, this piece, just from the date, and he was really moved by it. And his name was Heinz. His name was Heinz. Anyway, so he actually, he said everyone thinks he's German, but he's actually, his name was from the slavery, the person that owned the slaves. So that's where he came from. He was a black man, and he stood there in front of me and he cried. He just cried. He was so moved by the piece, and he had his own connection to it. So it's people connect to the artwork through their own stories. And yeah, it was so moving that, these stories are outside our domain. It's out there in the real world. not one of my art pieces has been displayed in a synagogue or in a Jewish venue. These are all out there in the big wide world. Yeah, it's great because every single piece that I put out there or submitted has been accepted for an exhibition. So that's a very interesting. I think that's really interesting.
Well, I wonder, sort of, we've come up to the hour and we've not actually had time for any
No,
questions.
sorry.
So maybe it'd be a good time to open up. So if you've got any questions, I'm going to put everybody on to a gallery view so I can see people. If you've got a question, if you want to put your real hand up or your virtual hand up, just let me know, or indeed, if you don't want to ask it in person. Oh, right. Yes, we've got a couple of hands up. I'm going to, first is Victoria, and then to Roger's iPad. So I don't know what your name is, but it's
Roger and Beverly. Thank you.
Right, well, go to Victoria and then Beverly. If you want to unmute yourself first.
I'd like to ask a question. Go on. Myself will do the lady first.
No, yes, Victoria's going first and then you.
Thank you.
Ever since I saw you at the beginning of the evening, I've been admiring your dress. Did you design this yourself?
No, I didn't decide. It's actually a top. It's a more of a longer top. It's not a dress. I'm absolutely useless. My mother was an expert in her day, but I just don't know how to put a dress together. I wouldn't know how to even lay a pattern out.
It's the material more than the.
Yeah. I think it might have been printed in India. That's a possibility.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so if we go to Beverly.
Roger and Beverly, Levy in Leicester. We want to ask a question. We live in Leicester and our kids live in Leeds, which we visit regularly. And you said there was an exhibition in Harrogate, knitting and sewing, which personally doesn't interest me. But what interests me is obviously all the Jewish history. Can you tell me, please, when this exhibition is on, where your work's going to be displayed?
Yeah, it's
in Harrogate.
The lucky thing is I have my diary, my old-fashioned file of facts here, so I can tell you exactly. I mean, you can look on my website.
What's that, please?
It's actually it's a knitting and stitching show. It's called, and it's from the 18th to the 21st of November.
Oh, so that's only.
But that is the only piece. Oh no! Oh yes, it is. That's the only piece there that will be on a Jewish theme.
And how much is there in the display? How much is there, please?
Well, I mean, the exhibition is enormous, and there's probably, there's about 17 pieces in that.
Of yours? Okay.
Exhibition, but there's just only one of mine. So
is it going anywhere? If we're unable to get to Harrogate, is there anywhere else with your work at the moment we could see?
Yeah, no, at the moment, no. It's already been to 2 different venues, and this is the 3rd one. And I'm hoping, maybe not next year, but the year after, there will be a much bigger show of my work. We hope. I don't want to talk about it until it happens, but I can always let Ed know.
Thank you very much.
Know when that happens. If it happens.
Yeah, we'll put it on our events calendar. So we have a huge events calendar, like I said at the top of the meeting, on the JSCN website. That's a really good place to find out, and anybody can actually add their events on there. We do check them out first to make sure they fit, but you can submit your own events if anybody's got one. So we'll definitely do those with Caren, and I'm sure Caren will let us know. Any other questions? Oh yes, I can see Helen down there. If you want to unmute yourself, Helen, thank you.
Hi, Caren. I'm very annoyed with myself because I was at the knitting and stitching show at Ali Pali, but I was so busy doing workshops that I didn't really look at the exhibitions, and so I missed your exhibit. So I'm very upset about that. Next time I'll make sure I go and look at the exhibitions as well. But what I wanted to ask you was, is all your stitch by hand?
Yes.
Yes, so you don't do any machine stitching?
No, I mean, sometimes in the construction, because I'm not going to spend hours and hours doing a hem, But I can just show you very quickly because Ed mentioned to me before about work in progress. So I've got it here. I'm working on it. So it's an unfinished piece. You can only see, this is, you might be able to see what it's going to become just from that. This is the beginning. It might give you an idea that that is going to end up being a talus.
Yes.
So this
Beautiful.
is actually 2020, and I'm working on now 2021, which is the other side, and it will end up with the stitches, you know, the frills and everything on it, and it will look like a talus. And so what we've got here is quite shocking. I mean, we're looking at, I'm making on something which is so traditional, so part of the Jewish culture and religion, and for centuries, you know, the men wear taluses. I mean, today women do wear taluses too. And for 2020, 2021, I was so upset and obsessed by this huge rise in anti-Semitism. So 2020 here is worldwide anti-Semitic incidents, which are much more than incidents, internationally, things that have happened around the world, which are really negative comments and things that have happened to Jewish people day after day. And I think people brush this under the carpet, or they just don't know anything about it. So I'm saying this because, you know, they say the most awful things that actually, because of all the research I've done, I can see that these are all echoes of what was happening in Nazi Germany in the 1930s and in Europe. And we're seeing it again. We're seeing it again, even though it's you know, it's not Nazi Germany. This is 21st century issues that where I'm looking at, and you know, and it's quite frightening because I'm not searching, I'm not digging it out of the ground. It's there. It's not far under the surface, all of this. And you know, this is issues for young people, for people. A lot in America, students have been treated badly. I mean, in the news, I think it was last week, where they tore up the Torah, you know, had their miniature scrolls, and they were tore them up. They smashed them, or they're pulling mezuzahs off of students' doors, or, you know, or anti-Zionist. It's actually another name for anti-Semitism, but they use a different name for it. There's a lot of it going on in universities around the world, and in the UK, and
very much so.
It's happening everywhere. In Bristol, there was a major incident which you might have read about. So,
thank you, Helen. That I mean, Caren, would you agree? I mean, it's part of what we do as artists, and I say we because most of my career I've been working as a photographer within the photographic arts and other things, to actually bring things and take them out of context so people stop and think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think you have to, because, you know, as I said before, you know, you're looking at that atlas thinking, wow, I love an atlas, or I do love a map, and then you're drawn into something which is really not what you expect. It's the same with the tray. It's the same with this talus, which is like this wonderfully traditional. To me, it's a comforting thing, because I remember going to a shul, to the synagogue, with my dad when I was a child, and he'd have his talus on, and there was something wonderfully comforting and very traditional about it. For me, I'm not a religious person, but there are these traditions which warm my heart. So to me, it's actually quite painful to hand stitch these things onto something which to me was a comfort. You know, this talus, which, you know, the young boy will be given maybe for his bar mitzvah, and will be buried in it as when they pass away. You know, it will go with them. So it's sort of, it's a difficult one. Sometimes I have to put a mental shutter on the work I'm doing, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to do it.
So where do you think your work's going to go? What you know, you've shown us one piece which is in progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, is it just going on and on this same theme at the moment, or is it awakening other things? Where do you think it's going?
Well, it's really hard to know, because when I did the eating disorders, before that I'd already done, it was already leading up to it that I'd spent a couple of years on women and eat dieting, and then it led into the eating disorders, which was 4 years, and that carried on. But then suddenly it reached a proper ending. It was right to stop it then, and then I couldn't think of anything for 6 months until this sort of conversation. I don't force anything, it just happens. Once I have this conversation at this dinner party, this meal out, that's triggered this. There's no way of knowing when it will stop, because, to tell the truth, this is, it can never end, basically. I feel at this moment that there is so much. I mean, it's a never-ending story, the research. We don't know how history is. We've had terrible time last year when, was it last year, or no, it was this year, when these people came down from the north, and they drove through the vicinity in the area where I live, and they had Palestinian flags, and they were saying death to the Jews, and rape the mothers, and rape the fathers, rape the daughters. And this is happening this year, 21st century, and I know it's there and it's bubbling. As soon as something happens in Israel, they're there, they're out, they come out of the woodwork, all these people. I mean, it's happened before, it happens each time. I know when I was younger, and I said, oh no, not again, it's all coming back to the surface. And it seems to be very much just under the surface now, because in a split second, there's all these rallies going on and Jewish people being attacked. Because these rallies, I mean, I've just stitched that onto this piece, things happening in, that have happened to people in America and in the UK who've been attacked or concussion and been sent to hospital. It's happening just up the road with the religious Jewish communities in North London, Hackney, around that area, where, you know, young people have things thrown at them. This is happening right now, and not just one or two things, but lots and lots of incidents are occurring right now. So it could, I don't know, it will just, I'm not looking at anything else. This is like very, very important to me. There's going to be more map making, more sewing of maps. There's going to be miniature artworks, you know, like I did for the eating disorders. There's things that I'm working on now, like a Jewish room, a home in Germany is another idea I'm working on. But the walls won't be wallpaper, it will be the maps of that period, the 1930s, and all the books, all tiny handmade books, which are the ones that were burnt in the burning, the book burning in Germany by students. So it's an ongoing thing. I don't know when it will end. I don't think it will be, I definitely don't think it will be 4 years. I think it will be much longer, because when I made the eating disorders artworks, I had about eight sketchbooks full of ideas and my research. And behind me, just there, that's just some of my sketchbooks just there. And I've filled up over 30 sketchbooks so far, and it's 2 years. So it's all in there, it's all in my head, it's all in the news, it's everything I follow and do. So I can't tell you when it will end, but it's definitely not moving to another arena at the moment.
I think we've got time for just one more question. So Sirush, if you want to unmute and ask a question.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Caren, everything is very interesting. I'm really proud of you, but I might have many questions, but I ask only one question. How can you keep stitching in the same font, same line, same direction, same size?
I wondered that too.
Yeah, have
Yeah.
have you got talented, or have you practiced a lot at the beginning? How can you do that?
It's well,
Thank you.
as I say to my daughters and other people, they say, how can you do that? How can you do this? It's just years of practice. That's what I say. So if my daughter says, yes, I know it's years of practice, whatever you do in life. And in this instance, it did start with the miniature doll's house samplers, which was, you know, it's 30 years ago that I started making those. So I have that practice, and I do not draw or write or make marks on this blank, as you can see here. It's completely blank here. This is where the thread is, and this is the needle, and I just work my way across. I just have the eye for it. I just can do it. That's why you get these beautiful straight lines, because I'm OCD basically. I just have to have everything perfect in this and in my life, even though it's quite difficult to actually have everything perfect, but you know.
It must be a skill muscle that you've got there, which, you know, it's one of those things. It's like driving, I guess. You don't think about what you're doing, and you've been doing it so long that you just do it.
You just do.
I just feel like we've only touched the tip of what you do. I think it's given us, thank you so much, an insight into the depth of, you know, what looks so simple and clear on the surface. And but yeah, it's still a very powerful message in its simple clarity. But then as soon as you start thinking about it and pondering what it is, it then has depth upon depth upon depth. You know, the way you were talking about the teacup and all the associated bits that go along with that, and the concepts that go around it, not let alone the symbolism which it's repeating or replicating. And Caren, I just want to thank you so much for coming on this evening. We've had a great audience and lovely questions, and well, I just encourage everybody to go and have a look at your work in person if they can, on your website, which does have some great photographs. You've been looking at them this evening, so Caren, you've achieved some great photography on the website which describes your work. So it's carengarfen.com. I did put it in the chat. But if you Google Caren Garfen, because Caren with a C is a very unusual spelling as far as I'm concerned, anyway, and it's very easy to Google for that reason, at least.
Yes, there's only one.
Our website very easily, and it does have the details about the Harrogate exhibition, and I'm sure any future exhibitions that are coming up there. Thank you so much for giving us insights also into where the work's going and what your thought processes are, and the process of drawing and looking and thinking. You know, are invaluable to understanding how you've come to the end result that we've been looking at. And I had a whole list, as you know, of works that we were going to look at.
Yes.
And it really didn't touch most of them.
No, it's but I thank you very much, Ed, for inviting me, and many thanks to the audience for joining us. It makes a huge difference to have that interest from people, and for the questions. So I'm really grateful to everyone for being interested in what I do. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for coming. As you'll have seen when you book for tonight, there are various other events that you can find on the JSCN website. Book to come along to them. We've got Hanukkah event coming up. We've got a number of bookshelf events where we're talking to authors of various books. We're actually going to have a book competition coming up in the near future, where you'll be able to win a copy of one of those books. So thank you, Caren, again. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the week, enjoy the rest of the evening, and we'll see you again sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Thank you.